Hello and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland video. We are coming to you on Monday the 29th of January, the aftermath of a win on Wearside, Dom. Sunderland back to winning ways against Stoke City. How did you see the game, if we'll just get straight into it, I suppose?
I thought after the Pritchard situation, and we'll talk about that no doubt in the next 10-15 minutes or so. After that, and given the background and what had gone on off the pitch and what Beale had said in his press conference only a few days earlier, I thought the game actually played out as well as he could have hoped, really. Some of them were good. From the off, really. I went to the Stadium of Light on Saturday expecting a nervy, anxious Sunderland performance. But they were on the front foot from the off, helped by Jack Clarke, who I thought was excellent, and we'll talk about Clarke, no doubt. And ultimately for Beale, the two players who he brought into the team scored the first two goals, and Pierre Ekwa, who I thought really flourished in that slightly advanced midfield role, because the dynamic of the midfield just hasn't looked quite right, has it, in recent weeks? It looked better on Saturday. I thought Ekwa was excellent, and obviously he gets a third goal. And even after Stoke's consolation, it never really felt, did it, like an unlikely comeback was on the cards. Beale needed that, didn't he? It felt like he really needed that.
Yeah, that was going to be sort of my first point on it. Given what was said throughout the week, really, since the end of that whole game, there was the protests in terms of the chanting against him, and then that only intensified, didn't it, over the week on social media with the trends and things like that. And then what came out of his press conference ahead of the Stoke game probably only added a bit of fuel to that, in terms of arguably rubbing supporters up the wrong way. Some of that possibly taken out of context as well, given the way that questions were asked and answered. But yeah, it was one that he really, really needed, because it kind of felt going into that game that there could have been an uncomfortable atmosphere around the ground, even at kick-off. There was the banner that went up in the opening minutes, but then you had the Pritchard situation into it as well, and it felt as though it was really going to boil over, but it didn't really. And I think obviously the performance helped that, didn't it? They kind of were on the front foot, and it felt a lot more. They certainly weren't at the most fluid best as we've seen under Tony Mowbray over the last sort of 12 months at times, but it did feel a little bit more front foot, a little bit more fluid in the final third. They were getting in behind the fullbacks quite a lot with Clarke, and down the right with Ba, like you said. And that probably, well, it did, didn't it? It helped a lot in terms of what was going to potentially be aimed at Beale.
Yeah, and obviously the banner went up early doors. Was it high performance culture from the background noise? I think it read. What I was going to say, what would have been interesting is what the reaction would have been like had Sunderland gone 1-0 down. I think we know what the reaction would have been like, and it's then how the players respond to that. And I asked Stephen Schumacher after the game about that, whether basically Stoke came with the hope of taking advantage of that. Schumacher didn't really bite, did he? He kind of said that they're well aware of recent results, but they came with their game plan and the way they wanted to play regardless of that, really. Beale's tone was clearly different after the game, wasn't it? I wasn't at the press conference last Thursday. Obviously, yourself was there, Matty, and Scott Wilson was there. But I've obviously read everything he said. Regardless of how the questions were framed and the context, the tone was different on Saturday, wasn't it?
Yeah,
again and again, he was talking about how brilliant the fans have been home and away. When he was asked about Pritchard, he quickly shifted that onto, why wouldn't you want to play for this club? It's a great club to play for. The fans are great. So he clearly realised it was a misjudgment Thursday. It was a bad misjudgment on the back of what was already going on. Now, the best way to put that right, the only way to put that right, is to win. Because I thought he spoke well after the game on Saturday, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say if you get beat. Do you know what I mean? That ultimately teed him up. Still feels like a big game on Sunday, but because it feels to me, I don't know about you, it feels to me like as things stand, he's always going to be one or two bad results away from him becoming the story again. And he alluded to that, didn't he, after the game? Like, it's been difficult because the focus has all been on me. Now, some of that is because of his own doing, I think. Some of it clearly isn't. But as things stand, it always feels like it's probably 1 or 2 games, 1 or 2 defeats away from that being the case. Is that fair, do you think?
No, I totally agree. I think even off the back of that, what's the saying? It's like one flower doesn't make sort of a garland, does it? And there were still elements in that game that were, if Stoke had a really good chance within sort of 30 seconds of the second half, even if that goes in at 1-1, then you wonder kind of how the response would be. As it is, that way, I think it was Campbell, he went over the bar, and then Sunderland pretty much went up the other end and scored the second. And you could just sort of see the shackles come off a little bit when they were 2-0 up, which, just did everyone kind of the world of good. Just a couple of stats as well, because that's been in and around the last couple of weeks in terms of XG and like the output going forward. It was the highest XG since the first game in charge against Coventry, 1.77. But on the flip side, it was the highest against under Bale in the league at 1.67 as well. I don't know. I'm a little bit conflicted by it because it was undoubtedly a much better performance, but I still feel as though there's plenty more there to give, and like you saying there in terms of the question, I think unless that continues to come out, a better side on the day than Stoke probably might punish Sunderland, because there were a couple of good chances in the first half for them in particular. And like you say, going down to Middlesbrough on Sunday, that presented itself as a really difficult challenge. And if, depending on how the next few days go in the transfer market as well, if you then go and lose at the Riverside, it does feel as though it's like 1 step forward and 2 back, or maybe even 3 back, depending on how the window goes.
And the narrative, we don't know what the narrative going into that Borough game is going to be yet, because I suspect it all depends on, are Sunderland going to be able to get a centre forward in? Are Sunderland going to be able to hold on to the best players? What happens with Alex Pritchard in the coming days? These are all questions really that clearly are going to be answered in the next 72 hours. We'll start with the Pritchard one then. Obviously, that bombshell dropped on Saturday just before the team news. It came after Pritchard had told Sunderland on Friday that he was unavailable for selection. Clearly, as is always the case with these things, there's 2 sides to the story. Sunderland will say they've offered Pritchard a new deal, a year extension on his current terms. Pritchard will say, well, that offer wasn't on the table in the summer. That offer was only tabled earlier this month. He's understood to maybe feel unvalued, that the offer didn't land until this month, and the suggestions that he has the better offer on the table, or a more security on the table elsewhere. Sunderland are saying that there's been absolutely no offers placed this month. Like, is the truth somewhere in the middle of both? Regardless, really, it feels like the matter needs to be resolved in the next 2 or 3 days for everyone involved.
Yeah, because if it doesn't, then what you're doing, you're stuck with a player who has expressed that he wants to leave, and he's just going to sit and run down his contract. And then if you're not going to play him, you're just wasting kind of finances, time, effort. Everything's kind of just stuck then, isn't it? So there does need to be resolution, and it does feel as though, like you said, there's the truth somewhere in the middle, but both parties could probably have handled it better. Pritchard certainly has impressed this season, particularly over the last 2 months and under Michael Beale. But for a player to come out and sort of withdraw themselves and make themselves unavailable for selection, that's never going to go down popular with supporters, really, regardless of how high you held within the team. Over the last 2 years, he's done well. He's been probably integral to the club getting back up into the Championship. Joining in League One, there was probably offers for him to stay in the Championship at that time. So it just feels as though it's got a little bit messy unnecessarily, which and it kind of all could have been nipped in the bud in the summer, one way or another. Again, does that feel as though it's fair? Yeah,
absolutely. I think from what I gather, kind of from Pritchard's side, the feeling is they clearly think that that they have more security on the table elsewhere. If Pritchard was to play now and get injured, say, then. And he's only got a 1 year extension on the table from Sunderland. Will that still stand? There's clearly doubts there. I suppose Pritchard and his representatives will say that they're just looking after themselves really and the longer future. He's 30, Pritchard, so by signing a 1 year extension, really all he's doing is delaying the uncertainty until this time next year when it all starts again. Now, if as is the case, as the lights go out on me here, if as is the case. If, as it is reported to be the case, Pritchard does have offers on the table elsewhere, will those offers still be on the table a year down the line, if he signs an extension. It's no secret that Mowbray wants him at Birmingham. It didn't take much reading between the lines of Mowbray's comments after their game against Leicester on Saturday. There's suggestions that there's interest from Turkey. Would Pritchard be interested in that move? I don't know. You would imagine that if he was going to go, Birmingham would be more appealing just because he's played for Mowbray before. It's, the championship, the upheaval of the family and all that. But then I guess Sunderland are going to say, well, we're not going to rip up your contract to give you the right to go and strengthen one of our rivals. There's no obvious outcome, I don't think, at this stage. But it feels like there's got to be an outcome, doesn't it, in the next few days?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because from the player's point of view, if you've sort of made your mind up, when you're out of contract, obviously you get the signing on bonus as well. That will undoubtedly be an incentive for Pritchard, I would imagine. That'll be more than what you would get from just renewing your contract here. From the club's point of view, where does this leave them? Do you think? I asked the question to Michael Bill: do they need to bring a replacement in, or would the emphasis then be on Adil Al-Shish or like Joe Bellingham, as we've seen for most of the season, or is it just another sort of example of them having to maybe just shift the parameters of the model, so to speak, and offer these more experienced players new deals? Because if you see Pritchard go out the door, we saw it last summer, Danny Bath leaving, Lyndon Gooch leaving, players like that, like really experienced heads who still have a lot to offer. But equally, you can see from the flip side, can't you, of the club thinking, well, what if you're going to offer a sort of a 2 or 3 year deal for the security that Pritchard wants? What benefit do they get towards the back end of that deal, if that makes sense? Yeah, it's difficult. There's a lot of spinning plates, isn't there?
There is, and that experience you talked about there, Mowbray would often talk about that balance, wouldn't he? As Mowbray would put it, the young players need to learn and hear from experienced heads, and there's only so much they can listen to a 60-year-old bloke, as Mowbray would say himself. Sometimes you need to listen and learn from your peers in the dressing room. Now, Ross Stewart's gone, Lyndon Gooch has gone, Danny Bart's gone, Bradley Dack's out injured, Corey Evans is still out injured. That leaves a real shortage of those experienced heads. Now, I know experience doesn't always have to necessarily be age. Dan Neil's experienced already, isn't he, in what he's kind of learned and achieved in the game. But it does feel like there's an important balance to be struck there. And I think purely on numbers, Beale, interestingly, in response to your question, said, you can see how short we were on the bench today. Yeah. Now, if Pritchard was to go, Bennett's going out on loan. That leaves Dack's out injured. That leaves a shortage in that area. Roberts is out injured. There's the speculation with Jack Clarke. We'll touch on that. Still feels to me like it's more than likely that Clarke's a Sunderland player at the end of this window. But I think that's suddenly looking like an area that Sunderland really need. If Pritchard was to go, I think that's an area Sunderland need to strengthen before Thursday's deadline.
Yeah, it does feel like, because you're taking six goal contributions in terms of assists and goals. Outside of that, obviously Jack Clarke's at the top with 16, Dan Neil 7, Abdoullah Ba took his total up to 7 because he was involved in all 3 goals at the weekend. Then it's Pritchard with 6, Bellingham after that with 5, Eck 4 after that. So that creative spark, it's just outside of Clarke, there's not a lot there, is there? So, like say, if you're taking that out, it's a huge impact and a huge dent on the team to fill. And it's interesting because I asked this when we were dealing with Christian Speakman on Thursday. Do you panic in that situation? Because there will be a clamour to replace somebody like Pritchard, won't there?
Undoubtedly, yeah, absolutely. Now, you would think Sunderland you would hope, have plans in place for that. Like clearly, the Alex Pritchard uncertainty isn't a new thing, is it? That has been a known factor for a number of months now. So you'd like to think that Sunderland have planned for every eventuality. But there's planning for every eventuality, and there's managing to get a deal over the line in the final days of the transfer window, isn't there? If it was easy, Sunderland would have signed a striker by now. I see the Kiefer Moore links have emerged again today.
I suppose the obvious one will be Ahmad, wasn't it? He's the one that continues to come back, and even yesterday, I think it was with him not being involved for Man United in the FA Cup again. That's going to run right up until the deadline, isn't it? You suspect?
Yeah, absolutely. And although Man United's stance really has been pretty clear, I've heard from a couple of sources in the last couple of weeks that Man United have made it pretty clear that they see Ahmad staying, but like that can change in the final days. If I'm not saying it will, I'm not trying to build hopes here, but if they look at it and think, well, actually, we've got this talented young player who's not going to play, who's not really going to feature, is he actually better off going and playing regularly? We've seen bigger twists, more dramatic twists than that in the final days of the window. Now, Michael Beale has previously said that he thinks Sunderland are well placed and would be favourites to sign him if that was possible. But because Ahmad clearly would want the Sunderland move more than anything else, but then finances, would the finances work? Beale hinted at that previously, didn't he? When he talked about Sunderland being favourites, he said that's kind of finances aside. Well, finances are a pretty significant aside, aren't they? So I wouldn't be hanging hopes on that by any means.
I mean, what do
you think? What do you think is the ideal scenario for Sunderland in these last few days?
I mean, it's $1 million question, isn't it? That I think the theme's been obviously the left back has been that has been popular across the last couple of weeks with the injuries that have been hit. Linked today with the young lad from Leeds, but it's striker, isn't it? And then even the central midfield position, someone a bit more combative in there. But if Pritchard is to go, obviously with the situation that's happened here, I agree. I think you'd probably need someone to go in there, because then you're asking the Job to move further forward, or you're hanging your hat on an increased rate of development from Al-Shish, which there's been flits of it. We've seen glimmers of it at times this season, but like most who joined last summer, he's still in that sort of settling in period, isn't he? So it does feel as though you need that kind of that spark in the final third, particularly like if we come on to it with the Jack Clarke situation. There was suggestions that Lazio have made a bid. Now, you understand where would that be? Because to me, if you're looking at an offer like that, in terms of the clubs that have been linked, this one feels a lot different, because I mean, you look in a couple of weeks' time, if that was to be true and Jack Clarke was to be interested in that move, he could come up against Bayern Munich in the Champions League in a couple of weeks, or he could be playing for Sunderland away at Huddersfield. So that it moves the needle a little bit, this one.
Yeah, and I think there are various clubs from overseas who've been monitoring Clarke over the last few weeks, months. Why wouldn't there be? You only have to look at what he's already achieved in the game and clearly his form this year. I think, clearly Lazio is the type of club that turns ahead, isn't it? Obviously, you only have to look at, firstly, the prestige of the club, and then secondly, as you say, what they're competing in this year. They're playing in the Champions League. But I do think that there's an, and I'm not saying that this means it'll happen or won't happen. I think Clarke and those around him know that they have to get this next move right, really, because not that they've got any move wrong. I mean, the Tottenham move at 18-year-old was a fantastic move for him, but he was still an extremely young lad at that stage. What Clarke wants to do now is continue to build on the momentum that he's built this season, and I think the next move has to be right to ensure that he does that. I think what the evidence from Sunderland's perspective, what the evidence of the first half of the season is no matter what happens, if Clarke doesn't go in the next few days, which I still think feels more likely at this stage that Clarke stays, if he doesn't go, that there's no question really about Clarke's attitude and approach. Is that he's made that absolutely clear in the first half of the season, and Mowbray talked about that again and again and again, didn't he?
We saw that on Saturday as well, didn't we?
Yeah. He's not the type of player who lets a speculation bother him. He's not the type of player who'll trip over his pet lip if he doesn't get what he wants. I'm not saying that's what he wants this month, but it just feels to me, I think, like the summer is a more suited time to take a considered decision as to the next step. And I think the other thing is, Lazio, like as I say, that's clearly a hugely attractive club and move. But if Clarke continues in his current trend. He's not going to be short of offers in the summer, is he? He's not going to be short of offers, and he's not going to be short of options. What it doesn't feel like is like this. It's a now or never move for him this month. If he continues like he is, there's only going to be more clubs interested, and more options and offers on the table for him in the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, his impact is, you know, it's no secret, is it? You can see it from the stats. But interestingly, it was nice to see him not have to be relied on as such on Saturday. You know, the goals came from elsewhere. I know he was involved in the assists for a couple, but the goals were shared out from different areas, including Mason Burstow getting his first goal for the club. You know, we saw Nazariy Rusyn getting his on New Year's Day, but huge moment for him, isn't it? Because he's the one who's been handed the most opportunities, if you like, in terms of starting this season. Hasn't really worked out at all. But, you know, and the goal kind of summed it up, didn't it? It was really scruffy, but he was in the right place at the right time, and there was just enough on it to get over the line. And you could see even him, as I spoke about earlier, the team seeing the shackles come off a little bit in the start of that second half. He had a little bit more freedom about his movement, and it was his runs that kind of drew defenders out the way to create the space for Ba for the second and for Echo for the third as well. So could do him the world of good, couldn't it?
Yeah, and there's quotes from Beale on We Are Sunderland where he talked about how impressed he's been with Burstow's approach and attitude since he came to the club. He says he's always won the last out on the training pitches after the sessions have finished, working on his finishing and various drills. The same with Rusyn, he said. Beale said earlier in the window, that Burstow going back to Chelsea wasn't going to happen this month. And then Burstow spoke to the media after the game on Saturday and said that the prospect of him leaving Sunderland this month never crossed his mind. I thought his quotes were really good after the game on Saturday. He was honest and open about how difficult he's found things in the first half of the season and how his confidence has taken a hit and how he maybe has started to self-doubt a little bit. But he said what I guess everyone connected to Sunderland will hope, that this now will hopefully be the springboard for him. When Sunderland signed Burstow in the start of the season, I thought that has the look of being a really good signing. I'd heard loads of positive things from the Chelsea end about him. He played, I think, only cameo appearances from the bench. But if you're coming off the bench for Chelsea, even with their woes at the start of the season, you know, you've clearly got something.
I think he scored in pre-season as well for them, didn't he?
Yeah. So the hope would be, you would think even if Sunderland managed to bring a centre forward in now before Thursday's deadline, Burstow will surely keep his place at Borough on Sunday. The hope for Burstow and all concerned now, I think it'd be that he builds on this, that this is the start. And you see that with strikers, don't you? Once they get one goal, they can't stop scoring. That'd be the hope. That he now kicks on and gets out of this low move what Healer wanted when he signed, and Sunderland get out of it what Taylor wanted when they completed the signing in the summer.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think obviously Rusyn, he scored against Preston, and then he was dealt a little bit of an unfortunate hand that the next game was the Newcastle game, and just the whole setup and obviously the contrasting ability and things like that. He was totally isolated and ended up being, it just totally stopped any momentum to his game before it even started, and then he was left out the starting 11 at Ipswich, so he never really got the chance to build on that. I agree with you. I think Burstow is probably likely to start on Sunday, depending on what happens over the next couple of days. On that, you know, again, we don't know who might or might not come in. Of the four who are there, are you saying that Burstow is the man? Would you be happy saying that he's the one that Sunderland should run with from this point?
I think there are signs that Burstow's the best fit for this team at the minute. Now, clearly, I think you want and you need more from him. But I think the signs that he's the best fit. I think you know what you're going to get from Rusyn. Works incredibly hard. It kind of sets the tone with his pressing from the front, doesn't he? But I think Burstow maybe looks, if he can build it, if he can get his confidence now and he can build on this and maybe get a goal or two in the next week or two. You look at like Patrick Bamford at Leeds as an example, couldn't get a kick for the first half of the season, gets a chance, scores, and then can't stop scoring. We asked Beale, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago about the futures of Hamir and Mayenda, and he basically suggested he'd be open to the idea of Hamia going out on loan if Sunderland managed to bring someone in. Mayenda, he said, is too young, and even if Mayenda isn't playing, he'd rather kind of have him under lock and key, really, and watch him and monitor him and work with him on the training ground. So that suggests to me that if Sunderland get a centre forward in, the hope would be you've got your new striker, if one lands, Burstow and Rusan working as the three, with maybe Hamia going out, and then maybe Mayenda just kind of learning on the job, I guess. What you don't want is, 18-year-old lad Mayenda, you don't want pressure, do you? You don't want him to be going on the pitch thinking like, Christ, none of the other strikers are scoring, it's all on me. You want to be able to drop him in and nurture him in a positive sense, not with the weight of the world on his shoulders. And I think for various reasons, all the strikers have had the weight of the world on the shoulders, haven't they, at one stage or another this season? Yeah. Burstow said himself that it feels like that's been lifted now.
Yeah, it is one of them where you've just felt it grow and grow and grow each week that it happens, which is only natural because it just put the burden so much more on Clark, which is why, again, to go back to this weekend, it was good to see them shuffle around with Ba's involvement as well. And I want to touch on him because he's another one that's kind of split opinions a little bit at times this season, particularly over recent weeks. Then he found himself out in and out the side, with Patrick Roberts' injury and things like that. It was a real arguably his best performance for Sunderland at the weekend. And I think, does this put to bed the sort of argument of where his best position is, i.e. being on that right side?
Yeah, that's where I think that's where he looks most comfortable. I think, I don't know about you, I think the kind of frustration with Ba is, like, you can see there's a real player there. You can see the talent there, and I think that's what makes it all the more frustrating when he drifts in and out of games. But then he's a young winger who's still getting to grips with the league and the culture and all else. I think inconsistency is probably inevitable, but I think we've all seen enough signs, haven't we, that if he develops in the right way, then someone could have a real player on the hands with Ba.
Yeah, he does feel as though, I've said this on previous videos, where if you look at the kind of structure of the model in terms of, we've seen players coming in from Premier League academies who've not quite made the step up. You look at the likes of Clark and Dan Ballard, Elise, Ekwa, players like that. Ba was one of the first ones to come in from the sort of European market. He does feel, out of all of them that have come in that bracket, the one who's the closest to being that kind of one who you can see might make the step up and compete.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think he's the one. So you look at like Jewison Burnett, for example. It's always looked like Burnett. He needs this loan move, doesn't he? That he's getting. Mayenda and Hamia haven't looked ready yet. Again, like, there's clearly talent there. There's clearly a player there, but they haven't looked ready yet to be regular starters. Ba, as you say, is probably the leading light in that sense. And going back to the Pritchard point, I think if Pritchard is going to go, or if Pritchard isn't going to feature, as looks likely now, Ba is probably the player who could and should benefit.
Yeah, I agree, especially when Roberts comes back as well. At least it keeps some sort of competitive in the squad. You wouldn't necessarily be against either or coming off the bench. I know Roberts' numbers has been something that has been spoken about at length this season in terms of the actual goals and assists, but it's no secret that you can see how much he sort of gets Sunderland up the field in the final third. I guess then, just to kind of wrap it up in terms of the weekend, where does this all leave Sunderland? It's an odd one, isn't it? Because there was so much sort of frustration and anger going into the game with everything that's been going on over the last 6 or 7 weeks. It almost felt if Sunderland got beat, that would only intensify, and then, would the club have had a decision to make? They end up putting in the best performance under Michael Beale, as we said, much needed. It puts a lot of pressure. The onus now just totally switches to the end of the transfer market, doesn't it? It seems it's a strange sort of feeling around the place after that.
Yeah, it is. I think first things first, and Beale touched on this really, didn't he? After, like, this has to be the start now. I asked Beale afterwards, is the hope now that you can draw a line really under a difficult few weeks, and that was the term he used, on and off the pitch, and he said, well, yeah, but like, for that to be the case, we have to kick on now, don't we? This has to be the start. Beale would point to the league table, for example, wouldn't he, and say, like, look, we're in a good position. I think that's what's key for Sunderland now. What Beale needs to do with the players' help is switch the narrative really, and ensure the focus is on the fact that Sunderland are well placed, and really look. If you were going to pick, I still think those top four look away and gone. But there's two places are up for grabs, aren't there? And Sunderland, obviously, only looking at the table, are absolutely one of those who fancy the chances of getting in. But it feels like the mood has to change for that to be the case, doesn't it? Like, and that's not pointing the finger at anyone, but it'd be hard for Beale to kind of keep trying to put fires out, whether he's the one who starts them or not. And I think for that to be possible, for that to be the case, they have to have a run of positive results. They have to build on that game. Otherwise, it's just going to be one step forward, two back all the time.
Yeah, it does feel like that. I mean, consistency is the key word all the time, isn't it? You know, I agree with you. It looks as though it's two from any number of teams, doesn't it, towards the second half of the season in terms of those last two playoff spots. It's just, it's really difficult. And these next few days are going to be critical, aren't they? You know, with the transfer window, it's all been put on that. It feels as though this period since Beale's come in, it feels like it's been longer than the 7 weeks he's been here, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does, because so much has happened on and off the pitch. That, you know, I think everyone benefits really once this window's out the way, providing Sunderland finish it in a positive sense. There's a bit of clarity then, isn't there? Right, we know where we stand. Yeah, we know where we stand. We know what we've got, what we haven't got. We know who's here. We know who isn't here, and now we can attack the games ahead. Let's see how the next few days play out.
Yes, there is light at the end of this long January transfer window tunnel. Thank you for that, Dom. Really appreciate your company. That has been another video here at We Are Sunderland. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channels. You can subscribe to our website as well for just £1 for 6 months worth of coverage, taking advantage of our launch offer at the minute still as well. I say across all social media channels at We Are Sunderland. And a big shout out as well to our partners down at the Fans Museum. You know, great place to go and get your pre-match pints as well for home games and all the memorabilia and things that are in there. Check it out if you haven't already. We'll be back later in the week with another video.